Uh, okay, then we'll start this webinar today. I am very happy to be able to welcome you to this launch, our Automotive Leather Benchmark, developed to assess and guide deforestation-free leather sourcing from the automotive sector. It's good to see that this topic can attract so many people. There's important discussion relating to deforestation. My name is Ingrid Tungen. I am the head of the Deforestation-Free Markets team in Rainforest Foundation Norway, and I will be your introducer today. Cattle, give you a little bit of context for this discussion that we're going to have. Cattle is one of the largest drivers of deforestation in the world, with beef as the main commodity. However, most of the beef remains in the national markets. In Brazil, it's up to 8%. But even though the beef remains there, the export of leather is huge. Between 2020 and 2024, Brazil, for example, exported about 1.78 million tons of leather. Most of it is exported to China and Italy, main hubs for processing, before it's exported as a finished leather or further refined product. Leather is therefore one of the levers we can pull in the global market in order to challenge the cattle-driven deforestation, and why we're here. Looking at the leather industry, however, in its own, the picture is still pretty bleak with little development. Leather is the worst performing commodity in the newest Forest 500 rankings. It's only it's the only one where 70% of the companies have no public deforestation policy. Its deep ties to forest loss and widespread use in sectors like the automotive makes this a critical blind spot in supply chains. I will give a short on Rainforest Foundation Norway, which is have developed this benchmark in partnership with Environment. We are an NGO working to protect the rainforest and the rights of indigenous and forest people. We are working to halt commercially driven deforestation by targeting the root causes embedded in the global supply chains and financial systems. We collaborate with companies, investors, and financial institutions to address the environmental and human rights risk associated with forest commodities such as soy, palm, oil, leather, and also a bit higher relevant for this discussion, also for the automotive sector, transitional minerals with a focus on nickel. The approach that we have includes advocacy, tailored guidance, collective engagement initiatives. And one of those initiatives, and I want to just give a short remark on that, is the investor working group on the deforestation-free automotive industry, which have a focus on leather, engaging investors onto talking with their investee companies and provide insight in the leather supply chain. This initiative is still open for investors if you know someone or want to take part of that. So with that context and why we are a bit discussing leather and why we as an NGO and as an organization have been working on that, I will introduce the further part of the program. The webinar here is co-hosted with Accountability Framework Initiative and, as I said, supported by Aid Environment. We will have different sessions presenting from both Environment and RFN, and afterwards a panel discussion. We will get back to who is hosting those. But for the moment, I'm very happy to give the word to Jeff Miller, the Director for the Accountability Framework Initiative, for some short remarks for your participation. Welcome, Jeff.
Thank you very much, Ingrid, and thanks for the invitation to co-host this event with Rainforest Foundation Norway. I'm Jeff Milder. I'm the director of the Accountability Framework Initiative, and just like to share a few words about our initiative and a bit the broader context for deforestation-free and responsible supply chains that our initiative provides. So we're a collaborative program to help drive the global transformation towards responsible supply chains in the agriculture and forestry sector. And this includes all businesses that use agricultural raw materials, such as uses of leather in automotive and fashion industries. And by responsible, we mean that supply chains, that supply chains support global goals for people, climate, and nature, as spelled out in international agreements such as the Paris Agreement, the Global Framework for Biodiversity, and the International Bill of Human Rights. We launched this initiative back in 2017 because at that time, there was already a lot of attention to the impacts of commodity supply chains on these issues, but there was little agreement on basic points, such as how to define deforestation, what were the main actions that companies should take to address these issues and risks, and how to measure progress. And this was even to the point that different scorecards at that time were giving very different grades to the same company, just based on differences in metrics and understanding about what was expected. And so we realized that in order to scale up progress, we needed to have a common understanding of what good looked like so that these expectations were very clear to companies up front. And then the same expectations could be used to assess performance, whether that was by a company's customers, investors, or other stakeholders. To build that consensus, we convened a coalition of civil society organizations. We've now grown to 22 members, environmental and human rights organizations, including Rainforest Foundation Norway, from around the world that come together to do this work. And we build outward from this civil society coalition to a much wider set of stakeholders from industry, civil society, and government. Our core product is the accountability framework, and it reflects the full consensus of our coalition. It's a global framework. It works across all commodities that drive deforestation and human rights impacts. And it also covers the entire supply chain end to end, from production through processing, trading, manufacturing, retail, as well as the finance of the supply chain. And this is very important for commodities such as leather that go through so many stages, from the original farms and ranches of origin all the way through to the final products, such as a vehicle that has leather seats that were produced by different intermediaries along the supply chain. For companies, the framework provides a management system that enables a practical way for companies to move through the different steps of the sustainable supply chain journey, beginning with setting goals, embedding those goals throughout the company, managing their supply chain, as well as managing production systems at the points of origin. In some cases, collaborating with peers at the sectoral level or in landscapes where commodities are produced, and then finally conducting monitoring, verification, and reporting. So these action areas are supported by the Accountability Framework's 12 core principles that have provided a foundation for the benchmark that Joanna will say a bit more about. We first launched the Accountability Framework in 2019. In 2023, we made a modest set of updates to our core principles, followed by updates to our more detailed operational guidance documents that provide the additional detail on all of these topics that get into quite a lot of detail. The Accountability Framework is free and open to everyone, available on our website. So since we launched the framework in 2019, it's now been applied by more than 500 companies. Companies can use it in a flexible and modular way, depending on where they are in their sustainability journey. So whether that's setting policies, getting down into the details of implementation through things like traceability, supplier management, as well as monitoring and reporting. And you can see on the screen here some of the companies using the accountability framework that source leather for different types of final products and consumer goods. The framework has also been applied by more than 130 other organizations in order to incorporate it into public policies, into industry guidelines, into implementation tools and systems such as monitoring and traceability, as well as its use in reporting, disclosure, and assessment. And today we're going to hear about one application of the framework for assessment through the RFN Leather Benchmark. So again, just want to reinforce that with the accountability framework, we aim to provide a very clear, common, consensus-based way that companies are able to know what the expectations are for responsible supply chains. And then those same criteria can be used to evaluate performance and progress over time. So with that, I think I'm ready to pass it over to the next speaker.
Thank you so much, Jeff, for this introduction. I see that there are a couple of people raising hands. We have not scheduled time for questions for this webinar, but please put your questions and comments in the comment section, and then we can answer them afterwards after this session. Now I will give the word to Joanna Fagan, which is the Program Manager in Deforestation-Free Supply Chains in Aid Environment, to continue with your presentation. Welcome, Joanna.
Thanks, Ingrid. So good morning, good afternoon. I'm Joanna. As Ingrid said, managing the Deforestation-Free program at Aid Environment. And here I will talk briefly about the methods we used for building the Leather Benchmark framework of indicators. Just reminding that the benchmark focus on two different group of companies within the automotive industry. The first one was the automakers, more downstream companies, and the second group was made by car seat manufacturers, more midstream companies. I'm trying to change. Oops. So, yeah. So this figure, it's a repetition of Jeff's figure. It's just to say that first, we use the AFI core principles and guidelines as a starting point for building the framework of indicators, considering, for instance, to what extent an external actor can identify if the company has set proper goals, in this case for removing deforestation and human rights violations from its leather supply chain. And second, how these goals are indeed reflected in the development of feasible internal systems for the implementation of the linked actions. We also consider relevant understanding the evidence of the company's collaboration with leather suppliers along the supply chain. And finally, if there are ways in which the company can measure and verify and report its progress as the basis for improving its policies and its strategies. So, oops. Yeah, so in practice, we develop indicators that assess plans, actions, and reporting by companies, specifically focus on the goal of eliminating deforestation and human rights violations from their leather supply chains. We organize these indicators into 4 main groups, aiming to balance the points assigned to each of the indicators and considering the specificities of the leather supply chain and the automotive sector. In this figure on the left, you can see how these 4 groups of indicators relate to the AFI action areas and core principles. So our first group of indicators aim to assess whether the company's policies and strategies are publicly available, and the second group, whether these policies lead to effective implementation of measures and actions. The third group of indicators focus on disclosure, specifically to understand if the information about the results from these actions taken by companies is initially reported and later accessible to external actors. And finally, the last group of indicators aim to assess the company's capacity to evaluate their progress in implementing policies and strategy, again, as a starting point for further improvements. I'm trying to change, yeah. So in my last slide, I want to give an example of one adaptation of an AFI core principle into one of the benchmarks indicators. So in the AFI action area of setting goals, for instance, the first core principle is to protect forests and other natural ecosystems, and more specifically to operate in supply chains with no forest conversion and also protecting the natural ecosystems. In this case, we were interested in assessing whether the existing company's policy or commitments, if this was the case, first is commodity specific, so explicitly citing and including leather as one of the forest risk commodities. And here it's important to highlight that the automotive sector has historically been under more pressure to prove the sourcing of minerals and rubber in a sustainable way, and much less pressure when it involves the sourcing of leather. So most of these companies' policies do not explicitly include or focus on leather sourcing. In the case where a policy or commitment exists, the indicator then gives different points when it specifies only one other ecosystems in addition to forests, or if it explicitly cites the aim to protect all natural ecosystems. The result of the framework of indicator was the adaptation of 9 of the 12 AFI core principles into 31 indicators organized in the 4 groups explained before. To conclude, one of the challenges in developing this benchmark was that between the 2 benchmarkings that we performed, the first one in 2022 and the latest now this year, 2025, AFI launched a new version or an updated version of the core principles. So considering this new version, we adapted some texts for clarity and adjusted the weight of some of the indicators. And the challenge was to maintain the possibility of comparison of companies' performance in the period between the 2 benchmarks. So this is what I wanted to share today. Thank you, and I will pass the word to Ingrid.
Thank you so much, Gina, for this very good run through of how we do this. Then I will just pass the word to my colleague, José de Mello, who will present the benchmark itself. So yeah, please go ahead.
Okay, hi everyone. Thank you, Ingrid, Jeff, and Joanna for your talks, and thank you everyone for joining. My name is José de Mello. I'm a senior advisor at the Rainforest Foundation Norway, and I will present you through our findings for our leather benchmark. But before I would just like to give you a bit of a contextualization so that our benchmark is not free-floating. And I will start by asking the questions of why leather, which Ingrid has already touched upon, and why the automotive sector. So as Ingrid has already mentioned, the why leather bit, I would just like to emphasize why the automotive sectors is such a key group when we talk about deforestation-free leather. Here we have a bunch of evidence on this, and it's important to pin that almost half of the leather exported from Brazil in terms of value is used by the automotive sector. And the other half is a split between footwear and upholstery. And that's because the automotive sector usually buys processed leather that tends to be, that is higher in value. So that's an important figure for us to keep in mind. And also, the experience that we have in RFN doing advocacy targeting leather for so long now is that leather tends to get lost in the automotive industry. A lot of consumers and company do think of leather, but not sufficient. So it gets, in a way, eclipsed by other deforestation risks, such as rubber mining, even the whole discussion on CO2, right? And well, brands are key in the well-known brands are key for the automotive industry, and these are visible, they are stock listed, which means that investors can do something about it, which we'll soon discuss a little bit with our investor joining our webinar. Still on the contextualization, just to keep us in mind that when we talk about a cattle, it's an animal that has legs. And I write it like that, a bit in a cheesy way, but it's really for us to remember it. It has legs. It can move from farms, and it's different than other crops. And it has a lifespan of usually 2 to 3 years, right? If we're talking about beef cattle, otherwise it would live much longer. Okay, now we can think about the leather supply chain, and here's a bit of a picture so that you can have a look at it, a simple visualization of that supply chain. The important thing about the cattle supply chain is that cattle will move between farms before it gets slaughtered, and that's why we have 3 farms in this picture before we reach the slaughterhouse. And then we move on to the leather processing, the cutting, and then the seat manufacture, and then finally we have the automotive industry, right? So it's important for us to situate where the benchmark is located in the supply chain. And when we talk about deforestation-free leather, the question that we have to ask ourselves is, are those farms free from deforestation and human rights violation? Just both the direct supplier, supplying directly to the slaughterhouse, but also the indirect supplier. And that means that for each farm, we should be able to access environmental status, animal movement, and social indicators, so that we avoid slave labor, land grabbing, so on and so forth. This is real the rabbit hole of cattle traceability, but it's not what I'm going to talk about today. What we are doing today is looking at the automotive sector to create a supply chain engagement and lead to impact on the ground. So we are mobilizing a whole supply chain through our advocacy, as you can see in the picture. In 2022, RFN did the first benchmark, leather benchmark, targeting the automotive sector, and we have now decided to update, and that's because in 3 years, we have seen significant change for the automotive industry and for the cattle supply chain. We are talking about all the legislations that came, most significantly, we can think about the UDR. There have been a lot of traceability initiatives, several working groups, geopolitics have changed, and we decided to do that again. So those are the 10 automakers that we assessed. General Motors, Ford, Toyota, Renault, BMW, Mercedes, Geely, Volkswagen, Hyundai, and Stellantis. And then we have 5 car interior makers. Those companies are not visible for the average consumer, but they are key in the supply chain because they produce the car interiors that all those brands that we all know about have in their cars, in their vehicles. And they are Adient, Toyota, Bushoku, Magna, Lear Corporation, and Forvia. And then, as Joanna already said, we are looking at all those companies in terms of policy and strategy, implementation, disclosure, and performance. Policy and strategy, what is on paper, the implementation, the evidence, the disclosure is like self-explain, the transparency, the supply chain traceability, all those aspects that are visible and reported, and performance more related to how we are tracking progress, right? Now the part that everyone is waiting, the results. We have been holding you on your seat. So this is what we saw. If you think that a total score is 100%, the average of all the sector, the companies that we included, that average is at 28%. So barely above 1/4 of the indicators that we have in our benchmark. For policy and strategy, the whole sector is scored 45. For implementation, 47. and then disclosure 7 and performance 9. Already there, I think it's a result worth, blinking a kind of like a yellow line, because it's already revealing, right? So here are the results for the automakers with an average of 30%. We have BMW on the top of our benchmark, followed by Mercedes. Then we have General Motors, Volkswagen, Stellantis, Hyundai, Ford, Geely, Toyota, and Renault. I won't do any deep dive on a specific company, also because all that information will be available, and the methodology of the benchmark is pretty heavy itself. Here is the results for the car interior makers. We have Adient on the top, followed by Lear, Magna, Faurecia, Forvia, and Toyota Bashoku on the bottom, with an average of 24%. So below the car seat, below the car makers, right? Comparing with the benchmark that we did in 2022, this is for you to enjoy with your eyes. We do see big jumps in companies like Stellantis, for instance, and Geely, which we are, as an NGO doing advocacy, of course, pleased to see this big the bar jumping from within three years. But we also have the ones that have not made a lot of progress, such as Renault, Lear, and what is very worrying is the bar for disclosure and performance, which have virtually, they haven't changed. So this is absolutely something that we should engage more on. How can we actually know that the policies and the ways to implement those policies are actually working, or if companies, they should choose another strategy. So how can we interpret those results? We do see a great variation between companies in terms of policy and implementation, really a lot of variation. You see companies that don't have a deforestation policy whatsoever, and you see companies that have included both legal and illegal deforestation in their deforestation policies. So when it comes to policies and implementation, there is a whole spectrum there, a lot of room for the work that RFN does. We are not an NGO targeting mostly consumers. We do the opposite. We target mostly investors and companies. A lot of room there to show if some companies can make it, why can't you not, right? Why can't you? Most companies improved in 2025, but we do have outliers, and Lear are example. And all companies, they're lagging behind regarding disclosure and performance. So as I said, how can we know that what is on paper is really working? And to highlight that disclosure and performance are important for frameworks like the CDP Forest, the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosure, upcoming regulations such as the EU Deforestation Regulation. And another key result to keep in mind is that none made to 50%. And remember, the average is 28, but not even a single company is halfway through what a good corporate accountability would look like. I still have a lot to show, which is the part I like the most, which is moving forward. Because one thing is the result. and the deforestation risk. But what can we actually make? How can we move towards deforestation-free? I think this is the real value we can learn from a benchmark like ours, right? What can we move? What can we do moving ahead? So the gold standard is deforestation-free leather. There is no doubt about that. But the experience that RFN has working with investors, working with companies, working with our partners on the ground in Colombia, in Brazil, is that the deforestation-free leather sometimes is a light that has to shine very bright, but it also makes us talk less about what is hidden or the baby steps that we need to take, right, in order to achieve that golden standard. And we should not forget those baby steps. Or sometimes companies, they can think as, oh, but I haven't found a tannery, a supplier that can provide me with deforestation-free leather. This is too complicated. And that's not the case. As long as you take those steps, you can create a good dialogue, a good supply chain engagement that goes beyond just making a requirement to your suppliers, right? So I just use that iceberg there to kind of like illustrate there this deforestation-free as the golden standard, and also the things that can be, oopsie, now I'm getting confused with my slide moving, with is hidden behind a claim. This is a bit of a heavy slide, but I'm using the policy, I'm using the benchmark methodology to talk about. So instead of talking about company Y or X, I can talk about what can be done in order to advance that leather in order for companies to score better in our leather benchmark, which means that they're making progress towards deforestation-free leather. So in terms of policy and strategy, we can think the first thing would be like a zero deforestation policy. Do the company have that in place? How comprehensive is that zero deforestation policy? What are the wordings used? Is it an anti-deforestation policy? Is it just an illegal deforestation policy? Or is it what we like the most, a zero deforestation policy, right? In terms of time-bound commitments, what are the targets for supply chain mapping? What are the targets for direct suppliers? What are the targets for indirect suppliers? This is all something that if the company did, it scored well in our benchmark. Commodity-specific policy. Do the company show understanding of leather? Each supply chain is unique, and if you just make a deforestation policy without understanding how different supply chains, different geographies operate, you won't get far. Human rights protection, how is that understood? Is there any free, prior informed consent in place? How does that relate to gender issues? How does that relate to land grabbing issues? All of those things are part of RFN advocacy, are part of our benchmark, and are part that a company should be doing, in that we tend to mobilize investors, and that we mobilize investors so that they can also move towards that. Regarding implementation, clear governance strategy. Does the company have a cross team involving different departments, or is deforestation-free isolated in the sustainability team with very low leverage power? This is something that is also in our benchmark. Is the company part of a multi-stakeholder platform? Jeff said in the beginning, the deforestation-free call to action for leather. This is something that we saw in our benchmark, and that companies scored positively, or gain that half score of that if they were part of a multi-stakeholder initiative, right? Evidence of traceability and monitoring. Here we are talking about traceability as a product level mapping and supply chain mapping as a supplier mapping. So one goes, do you know who your suppliers are? How do you know that? That's the implementation, right? And what kind of traceability system do you have in place, or do you know if there is a traceability system in place whatsoever to secure the deforestation-free nature of your leather? Systemic risk assessment. So risk is something fluid. Are there new trends of deforestation and market dynamics? How are you systematically assessing risks? In terms of disclosure, does the company have a third-party verification available? So can we as civil society access independent audits that are trustworthy? Or do you have that? Because there is also this distinction between confidentiality and anonymity. And, you know, like it could be confidential, even though you're not disclosing, but you could potentially disclose perhaps to a responsible investor. And then when we talk to companies, we don't necessarily, you know, it varies a lot. Some say that they do, but they don't feel like they can disclose. And some, it's just a black box. But I think it's a legitimate ask for us to have access to those third-party verification systems. And who are they? Suppliers' name and locations. Do we have data on that? Also something that investors struggle a lot to find out. Who are your suppliers? Do you know where they are located? Impacts of using leather or alternatives. Are you assessing leather in terms of pollution, for instance? And some leather alternatives, they are made of plastic. And we are not here, we are not an NGO against leather. We are against deforestation and human rights violation. If a company decides to phase out leather, it's a decision that the company makes. We are not here to preach, but that should also be considered. In terms, and remember, disclosure and performance are the worst performing indicators, right? In terms of performance, we can discuss that in terms of roadmaps and timelines. Often companies set targets, let's say end deforestation by 2030, but without a plan, without a roadmap. What are your milestones? How do you get there? That's the performance indicator. It's more regarding how can you really track progress. You know, it has a time dimension issue, that performance of ours. Systematic reporting on progress, not an individual annual reporting that is free-floating. But something that is really measuring progress, that allows a company to be reflexive, to look at itself and understand what are the loopholes, what is not progressing. That is something we really struggle to see, and this is really like the receipt of something. If we don't have that receipt, it's very difficult for us to measure impact, for instance. And then we have a percentage of supply and suppliers traced to origin. This could be like 25% of our leather is deforestation-free. 25% is unknown. It's fair. It's okay, you know, but we should know, it should be reported. And right now it's a big black box that we don't know what's in there. Or 50% we can trace back to the slaughterhouse. Remember the different boxes in the supply chain visualization that I showed in the beginning, right? So these are all important steps that we want companies to make. And I think what I would like to say as well is that none of that is, oh, do you have deforestation-free leather, yes or no? it's not a matter of yes or no, and none of those asks are actually they are very hard, and I'm not saying that this is not easy, this is not complex. But what I'm trying to say is that it is possible to navigate the deforestation-free leather ask and the deforestation risks included in leather in that framework of our benchmark that Aid and Environment Joanna is here today. So brilliantly helped us to build using the core principles of the AFI. Something to keep in mind. I know it was a heavy slide. Something to keep in mind when you are navigating those asks, right? There is a distinction between zero versus illegal deforestation. We see that a lot in companies. A lot of them just make a report or a policy on illegal deforestation. And the big issue here is that deforestation can be legal. In some cases, let's say Brazil, which is the main supplier, it has the biggest cattle herd. Some biomes in Brazil, you can deforest even 80% of that biome, right? So it's a big issue, what kind of deforestation policy you have. Is it covering forests or is it covering all ecosystems? Some ecosystems are crucial for protecting rainforest. The Cerrado in Brazil, again, it's another one. And a lot of them are incredibly rich in biodiversity as well. Operating company versus parent company. Some policies apply to some companies. We always try to assess the parent company. That's why, for instance, you don't see Volvo in our benchmark, because that's under Geely. You don't see Fiat because that's under Stellantis. So we try to do that kind of advocacy with the parenting company, right, at the corporate level. There is a distinction between, is the policy for that automotive company addressing all third-party suppliers? And then there is this distinction between deforestation conversion-free leather to deforestation conversion-free suppliers of leather, which is always what we should be aiming for. So we avoid leakage and we avoid deforestation-free leather from becoming a premium or just another frontier or a new product line. And when we're talking about traceability, whether it's a supply or supply chain mapping, product traceability, supply chain mapping, it's important to consider different levels of origins that we can move on. Of course, if you don't know which country you're sourcing leather from, and believe me, it happens, some companies, they don't know all countries that they get their leather from, you're not going to move from country to property, you're going to move from country to tannery, and then from tannery to municipality, and from municipality perhaps to property, which is the gold standards that we really want to see. I'm closing now soon. So here we have the leather benchmark, where it is located. And of course, this is just an acknowledgement slide that we are talking about the automotive industry today because we want the automotive industry to do its part, but it's a whole supply chain engagement here that is necessary. When we talk about the farms, we're talking about traceability, data integration, a very much needed point, a good MRV system, transparency and logistics. Deforestation and conversion has to be included in certification schemes. We need investors to act responsibly, not to invest in deforestation. And of course, we need diligence, we need engagement from the automotive industry. And we see that for long, it seems that the automotive industry has been quite relying on too many actors in the supply chain and profit right from the deforestation embedded in their products and in the selling of those products. We have a very good horizon. That's my last slide. We have a very good horizon We have good regulations in place, as I mentioned, the UDR. We see good progress, but we need accountability from the automotive industry to solve that puzzle and stop deforestation. Now,
thank you so much, Jose. I see there is a lot of questions in the comments. Maybe you can answer them as we move forward to the next and the last part of our webinar. I'm going to give the word to Jeff as a moderator, and also very welcome to Joanna again, as aforementioned, to join the panel with Simona Risotto, who is the lead analyst biodiversity in La Banque Postale Asset Management LBPAM. I give the word to you, Jeff. Welcome.
Hi, sorry, Ingrid. I'm mediating this.
Oh, sorry. Oh.
This chat.
Yeah, I saw that Jeff looked a little bit bewildered. Sorry, it's just Isabella who's moderating. Was a bit of a change. Thank you. Then you can keep the word, Jose, for this session.
All right, thank you, Ingrid, and thank you so much, Simona, and thank you so much, Joanna, for joining this chat with us. Ingrid has already introduced Simona, and I would like to start with you, Simona, as a responsible investor. A very simple question to you. Why is stopping deforestation an important topic for you in your investment decisions?
Yeah, thank you, Jose. It's a simple question, but yeah, I mean, I would say that for LBPM, as like other responsible investors, the approach to integrate, like in take care of deforestation in the investment strategy is based basically on two main objectives. The first one is to protect the investment value of our investments, because identified sustainability risks could affect the financial performance of invested companies. And of course, deforestation takes part in those kind of sustainability risks. And also the other objective is, of course, to contribute to the economic transition toward more sustainable assets. And basically that means to reduce the negative impact of investment on nature. And so those two objectives are like reflect, I would say, the dual approach of what we call double materiality. That's the basis of the socially responsible investment. And so in doing this exercise at LBPAM, using different tools, we noticed that our portfolio have a significant impacts on soil, particularly through deforestation and I would say more largely land conversion pressures. And so in response of that, we created tailored actions to monitor and mitigate these impacts in our biodiversity policies that include, of course, the specific chapter on deforestation risks. And this is part then, as of today, of our investment strategy.
This is all very interesting. And could you talk a bit more about the risks and losses linked to deforestation from an investor perspective?
Yeah, I would say that. So, I mean, the first point would be, in addition of it, I would say, to the financial risk that is linked to the climate-related impacts on business. That is part of the double materiality approach. I would also add in the spectrum of risks and losses linked to deforestation, two other risks. The first one would be the regulatory risks, because we're facing actually growing number of the regulatory requirements related to biodiversity. For example, in France, we have the Article 29 of the Energy Climate Law, which mandates investors to disclose the policies of managing biodiversity-related risk and also report on dependencies and impacts on nature. And of course, this integrates the deforestation risk. And also at the European level, we can see it with the in the sustainability finance disclosure regulation that requires extra financial indicators to report on, such as, for example, the fact that the companies have or not a deforestation policy in place. So this is what I would say for the regulatory risk, but there is also what I call the reputational risk. Because of course, if an invested company is linked to deforestation controversies, then the credibility of an investor as a responsible investor will be affected. So this is another big point to have in mind.
No, thank you so much. It's great to see a convergence in the arguments towards the protection of the rainforest and the sustainability of business, that these are not divergent interests, but rather convergent interests. I think this is very valuable and interesting. Joanna, now I would like to address more like I'm sure every time we talk about leather, there is this elephant in the room. You have worked extensively with the cattle supply chain as a whole. And your perspective, what is the key difference between working to ensure deforestation-free practices in beef versus leather? And what is unique to leather that the public and investors should understand?
Yeah, thanks, Jose. I think first there is a common and unfortunately wrong understanding that the leather supply chain starts at the slaughterhouse. In this sense, I think it's essential that the leather sector recognize that the starting point of its supply chain is in fact the cattle breeding, then fattening, then finishing, as you showed. And that the slaughterhouse is the point where exactly it separates from the beef supply chain. I think the leather sector can benefit a lot from the strategy to be integrated in all the long-term discussions and strategies to remove deforestation and human rights violations that are now in place in the cattle supply chain, but involving mainly beef sector actors. And I think another point that it's important to highlight, and maybe this is more a perception of the consumer side, is that leather not being an edible product and has many transformations along the supply chain, it puts it in a position where it's a little bit more difficult to link directly to the animal life cycle, which is easier when you are consuming beef because you are having the beef in front of you. So I think these two main points are those that I wish to see some change when understanding the leather supply chain.
Yeah, no, this is also a very important point. I mean, it's impossible to work with leather without working with the whole cattle supply chain, right? And from our perspective, we do see a lot of intermediaries in the leather supply chain. And one thing that is, if you have a lot of intermediaries, it means that you have a lot of added profit, right? Otherwise, we wouldn't have so many intermediaries. So if we have a lot of them, it's also, I think it's very much aligned with what you said, is also our experience. So we see that each actor is somehow, there is a great addition in the value of a final leather product, because leather is a relatively cheap commodity, but it could be sold as a very expensive purse, right?
Yeah, I think you are touching in the point of using the fact that leather can be seen as a byproduct to, let's say, remove a little bit the accountability of the leather industry in deforestation, no? Of course, if you consider the entire supply chain, and here comparing the beef and the leather, the beef one is much simpler and shorter. So from the animal slaughtering or the animal breeding, fattening, finishing, and slaughtering to the final product, you have 2 or 3 main stakeholders, no, from the slaughterhouse to the market. So I think the leather is a byproduct for the slaughterhouse, yes. As slaughterhouse main operations are focused on beef trade. However, I understand that already in the next step of the leather supply chain, leather becomes the central product of tanneries, for instance. So for leather processors and industries that use leather as well. And as you already mentioned, there is a huge aggregated value along the supply chain of the leather. So from the salted hide to a car seat in a luxury car, for instance, the huge aggregate value into this final product actually should be reflected in giving to the leather supply chain or the leather stakeholders a more relevant role on the discussion or strategies to exclude deforestation and human rights violations, as you said before. So, yeah, I would say that it's quite relevant to reposition the leather sector as an important and relevant sector when talking about the cattle supply chain. It's not only because the beef is indeed perceived as the volume, no, of the cattle, but for every animal that is slaughtered for producing beef, there is a leather hide that it's being also traded, no?
Yeah, wonderful. We are short on time, maybe because I talked a little bit too much, but thank you so much, Joanna and Simona. Ingrid, I would like to give the word back to you.
Thank you. I'm just going to use the last minutes to say thank you to the panel and Jeff and everyone and you, Joseph, for leading it. And I can say now that the link to the Automotive Leather Benchmark is live, so you can click in it and also look at it and look at more closely at the results, and also note that there's also a mineral component there from an earlier benchmark that we did last year. So it's possible to have both these supply chains looking at that. Just before I leave you, if you're an investor interested in sustainable transformation, invite us to join our automotive working group and help share the future for responsible sourcing, as I mentioned earlier. And also for ongoing updates and insights into the deforestation-free markets, just please sign up for your newsletter and stay connected with the latest development. We encourage everyone to share and support the benchmark and as a key initiative to drive the deforestation-free supply chain further on. So share on LinkedIn, on the post, or in a newsletter that you have. It will be amazing for us. So thank you so much for the attendance. I see there is a question where we can access the benchmark. I think it was just put in the comment. And thank you to Accountability Framework Initiative for co-hosting this event and inviting alongside with us for this webinar, and for Aid Environment for participating in the partnership making this benchmark, and specifically to all of you who joined personally.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for the webinar, for the meeting, and have a good afternoon, morning, or wherever you are in the world today. Okay, bye-bye.